All right, guys, welcome back to the Fitness and Philosophy podcast. My name is Robbie Gustin, and I'm joined, as always, by OPEX founder and owner, James Fitzgerald. James, how are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. I was just about to wave, but I guess some people won't see the wave, so we're waving. Hi, everyone.
Um, how have you been doing?
I've been good. Thank you for giving me a second to reflect upon that. I'm shaved. I shaved my head and body and face. Everything's fully shaved today. So for those who know that feeling or can connect to it somehow, which you don't, obviously, Robbie, um, I feel really good. I feel fast today. So
Good.
things are great up here.
And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but this week you reached your 10,000th workout.
Yes, man.
Congrats.
Thank you so much. That was a seminal moment. Seminal moment in this meat sack called James Fitzgerald, and me being on this fast spinning planet. That was pretty cool. Not spent a lot of time on it. For those who don't know, I just have kept training logs and figured out, like, tried to calculate how many times I've done a workout since I started rehabbing my knee, or rehabbing my leg. Sorry, when I was 18, and I think it was around 10,000. So. I reached that the other day, and it's pretty cool.
That is really cool. Like, just even the concept of like 10,000 workouts, just
Yeah,
over that long a span time.
yeah. Yeah, maybe we need to have a somehow construct philosophy inside of that. Maybe have a podcast just based upon that alone. Because I got
Yeah,
lots of things to share on. Which I'll talk a little bit about today. Of the competency and expertise and experience, and like how all that fits together, right? It is something that does fit together. Um, and like you and I have talked about all the time, and some of our listeners may understand, there's an experience component to fitness that has to be felt, and observed in order for you to gain exposure to things that allow you to prescribe. And so you can imagine if there's thousands of those iterations, you learn a lot. So a lot of good stuff in there.
yeah, it's the exact opposite of the like 4-hour body and the 21-day. I mean, yeah, focusing more on the long
You.
game.
let's not let's not make it a secret here. That's
Yeah,
why I'm virtue signaling that. It's no secret. It's a
right.
long game, okay?
Yes.
It's a long game approach. That's the whole idea around it, And the sad thing, though, not to end it on that note, but I had this realization on our knowledge series call the other day, is that I only have like 4,000 or so left.
Yeah, I heard you say that. I was like,
That was sad. That was a punch in the throat right then. But then, of course, it wasn't Brandon, but one of my other coaches, Sean McCullough, who said, "Oh no, he made me think about it. He didn't say it, but I was like, well, I can do doubles or triples now every day. I can get I can get
get up to
12,000.
12,000.
Yeah, for the rest of it. But anyways, we'll see. We'll see. Maybe I'll start counting my walks with my wife and dog as my exercise sessions, and then
Those are workouts.
yeah, add it up.
Well, congrats again. That's really cool.
Yeah. How about you? All
Um,
good?
yeah, overall, doing pretty good.
Clear-minded?
Yeah, went kayaking last weekend, and that was pretty cool.
Isn't that so much fun?
It's really fun. Yeah, Brendan and I went together to the local beach, and it was really nice. By the way, I saw in your stories, like, man, I don't know if it's just the pictures you're taking on your phone, but like when you are on, if it's a lake or a river, but it's just like crystal clear, and it's so cool looking.
Yeah, that's my mornings here on it's called Mill River. It's a part of Spokane River that feeds into Lake Coeur d'Alene. And I'm up at 5-ish, and just after that, I mean, there's no one out there. The sun has been up for half hour, and it's just like nothing, just animals, and wind. And so that's what you get. That's what you see is what I get to see. And I love capturing that more so for my own memories too, right? Like, because I go back and listen to it, and you can just hear the birds chirping, and like just being in that solemn, area, and it was beautiful, right?
Yeah,
But
that's
doing
really,
kayak enables you to do that, right?
yeah, it's definitely It's something that I didn't think of too much around this area. Like I did it when I used to live in California, but I started doing it more around here, and it's just tremendously relaxing, enjoyable,
Yeah.
great way to be out in nature.
Yeah. Yeah. There's some freedom elements to it as well, right?
Yeah,
Just getting out and not knowing where you're going and just like setting a path. It's kind of cool.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I agree.
And just so people know, we're talking about just like recreational, just moving along the water, right? This is not like level 2, 3, or 4 whitewater.
Yeah, not. I think Kelly Starrett used to be like a professional kayaker or something like,
Oh,
but like
wow.
Grand Canyon and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I had clients who did marathons, right? Some folks did some stuff in boats for over long distances on that. I'm not talking about that. Although I went for like over 90 minutes the other day, and that was pretty cool. That's a whole different experience too, right? Sitting down and constant movement, and you can imagine my mind, about the contractions and fatigue rate and sustainability, and all these things are playing through my head. So it's pretty cool because I've rehearsed like running with that, and now it's like a different cyclical modality, which has a different power time curve, which has a different fatigue point, which has a different, you know, arousal and different kinds of focus, and so it's pretty cool.
yeah, it's definitely a different stimulus, but
Yeah,
it's really enjoyable.
yeah, yeah, yeah. The kayak.
Cool. We ready to talk about some science,
Yeah, some science and some fitness.
science and some fitness. So, for those of you listening, James and I were just talking about this. This topic obviously is gigantic, and we could and probably will talk about many different topics related to science and fitness. The purpose of this first call is just to kind of get the conversation started,
Mm.
and then we'll kind of delve deeper from there. Um, but before we get to the connection between science and fitness, I wanted to discuss how philosophy plays a role in that discussion. So, point number one is philosophy is typically thought of as the discipline that explores the connection between different disciplines. It's the meta discipline. It's the one that sits over the others and kind of um, it's a backseat driver. Sits back and says, "Oh, it's cool what you're doing there. How does that relate to this? And how do these two connect?" So there's that Wilfred Sellers quote that I mentioned in the first episode, where he says, "Philosophy answers the question: how do things, in the broadest sense of the term, hang together in the broadest sense of the term?" And he has a whole lot more in mind there than just the connection between disciplines, but that's definitely part of what he's getting at.
Is there an argument for there being another route to understand the differences between disciplines that is argumentative in philosophy, or against philosophy for that being the meta discipline?
You mean another discipline holding that title?
Yeah, I think I was just talking about a meta, but like, is there any argument to it holding the keys to looking at the two, of any two discipline? Or
That's a good question.
is it impossible to actually name it anything other than philosophy as being that meta discipline?
I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with historical circumstance and things that used to be philosophy, like, what Newton did was natural philosophy, and then it peeled off and it became physics. So I think
Okay.
a lot of it is more historical accident than it is, there necessarily being a strong argument for it. But I do think there's at least some argument for it, in the sense that philosophy is that discipline that kind of stands back and asks, "Hey, what's going on here?"
Yeah.
With
Therefore, the
regard,
structure of it would put it into perfect position to do this.
yeah,
Yeah. That's what it is. Yeah.
but I don't think it. We don't want to be dogmatic about it. I don't think it's
Yeah.
the only possible one. There could be others, but
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
now, it's the contender.
Yeah. Well, I guess the others would be that you wouldn't do like you're going to discuss compare and contrast or look at the connection. You would just put them in silos and discuss either. Right.
Yeah,
That would be it. Yeah.
yeah, and there's some times where people within religion or people within science, there are plenty of scientists who write about science and its relation to religion. But typically, when you're looking up like the relationship between science and religion, if you're looking at books or articles on that, it's typically philosophy.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
So philosophy, generally speaking, is the subject that asks and tries to answer questions like, how does morality relate to religion? are they the same? Are they different? Can one be moral without being religious? And where does morality come from? How do politics relate to sociology? How does the just society relate to, how people interact? How does science relate to religion and morality? That's a famous one. And then how do free will and consciousness relate to science? That's a big one these days. That's a whole other conception of philosophy that we'll probably talk about, where we have these cherished beliefs over here about love and meaning and free will and consciousness that do not seem to jibe very well with, the void and matter hurling through it according to laws. And how do we connect these two, and what do we have to give up and what don't we, and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. We'll talk about that not only in the future, but a little bit of it today in a real world situation for that for fitness.
Awesome.
Mm.
And then the second point is that there's a whole branch of philosophy called philosophy of science that investigates deep and fundamental questions about science. So scientists go out and do science, and in a lot of ways, they wouldn't be able to do science if philosophers were constantly on their back asking these questions about, hey, what are you doing? But it does become very worthwhile, especially when theories change, as Thomas Kuhn pointed out, that these questions are being asked about the fundamental concepts of a particular science. What's the status of the laws of nature? That's a famous question. Are they just exceptionalist generalizations, or are they things that can't be broken? Is a scientific theory tested in its whole against experience every single time you have an experiment, or is it just one proposition that's being tested? Is the scientific method objective and rational? Science proceeds as if it is, but sometimes we have to sit back and ask, is it? What counts as evidence or data? This is taken for granted in science, but we have to ask, especially with things like neutrinos and blips on a screen that we see now. It's not like Galileo, where you were doing these bodies that you could very clearly see in front of your eyes dropping at a particular rate. What counts as data now is a different thing, and we have to ask, what sorts of things are allowed as confirmation of a theory or evidence against the theory, things of that nature.
Yeah, I think the philosophy of science, it's probably pertinent, and I want to make it sound like we're in an age of time where it's like a really special period, but I think it is only based upon what my readings would be, or just my own context of history. But it's far more important that the philosophy of science exists today because of it was always embedded, because the deepest definition of science was for going after the truth and doing whatever is necessary, even through refute and trying to be disproven, to still hunt after 2 times 2 equaling 4, to go after what that is, right? And philosophy existed in all of that practice because it was basically embedded inside to ask questions like, are you really sure that you think what you've hypothesized is really true? Because that's a philosophical question, right? But I think that's what I'm saying, even more so to today, it's highly important because, as I mentioned earlier before our call, and we will discuss it. I don't know if it's really right now relative to where philosophy of science exists and science is defined, but it's really hard to grasp what is true and what is real, because we're not willing to take that patience and time to ask those questions, which is ironically part of the whole scientific process. I mean, currently to today, Robbie, right? So
Yes.
I think philosophy of science needs to be again, it's funny that we actually need to make it languaged and be aware of that we're discussing it. So I just think it's very, my whole point is I think it's very important for 2020 that we make that aware, like that was always a part of the process. It was always part of the process. And now we have to be like steadfast in continuing to ask those questions, right? So when we mention something, so you and I mentioned something based upon a theory of fitness as an example, that has to be, you got to ask questions on that to ensure that we really are on the right pathway to try to find observable truths, right? And that's what
Yeah.
science was. It always was that, right?
Right.
Science was never put together to answer questions, right? Science was put together to just go after things, right? And just allow a method to determine, what is right, So
Yeah, and I mean there are a lot of physicists even today who actually are making similar points to the ones you're making, where they argue for the importance of philosophy of science today. Like there's something that's been lost. So, for example, in the transition from Newton to Einstein, like people could explain and predict things really well with Newton's universal law of gravitation. But at a certain point, what was actually going on broke down, and Einstein, in addition to doing science, had to ask deep philosophical questions about like, what is the nature of this thing?
mm-hmm.
In Newton, it was just spooky action at a distance. We're not quite sure how it works, but we can predict it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have these deeper thinkers that come along and kind of help develop the concept more. So, doing what there's this famous philosopher, Thomas Kuhn, who wrote the book Structure of Scientific Revolutions, where he argues that, there's normal science where, scientists go about their day-to-day business, but then theories break down at a certain point. And when that point comes around, philosophy and deeper thinking about the central concepts of a science is necessary to move past, to gain further ground and getting access to the truth.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. Well, that'll bump up against some of the issues that it proposes in the way for fitness when we get there. So, because there's, what you heard in there is, there has to be a system in place. There has to be a pathway. There has to be regulation. There has to be some kind of questions. There has to be at least some construct of what this thing is we're talking about. And if there isn't no construct, then it's hard to wrap your hands around any science of it,
Right.
So, but anyways, doesn't mean we're not going to ask the questions though.
No, definitely not. So those questions that I mentioned above obviously will connect to what we're talking about in fitness, but three others that really, really will connect to what we're talking about that are asked in philosophy of science. What can science tell us and what can't it tell us? James and I were just discussing that this may be a whole episode next time on just what can science contribute to fitness and what can it not contribute to fitness. There's a whole experiential element that just, maybe it has something to say and maybe it doesn't have something to say. So what are the boundaries and limits of what it can tell us? One that's really going to be useful today, I think, just to maybe frame the conversation, whether we choose to use this distinction or not. What's the difference between the so-called hard sciences, things like physics and chemistry, which seem to have clearer answers, more hard and definite rules and laws, and things like psychology and sociology. And, when we discuss this, we can say, hey, maybe we toss the distinction out, or maybe we say it's more soft or a combination. But just even asking the question about the study of fitness, what sort of thing is it, I think will be useful.
Yeah. Yeah. So can the study of fitness be a science? That's the big main question right now. And then further, we can talk about how they're going to work together.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then last question that again, this might be its own episode, but it will relate to what we're talking about. There's a whole discussion in philosophy of science about what distinguishes science from pseudoscience. What makes us trust, physics as opposed to astrology? Or, there are other examples, but that's just kind of an easy one that most people understand.
Yeah.
So, what distinguishes things that purport to be science but are not in fact and do not deliver us closer to the truth, and things that do deliver us closer to the truth?
Yeah. Would empirical or observational stuff fit into pseudoscience in a classification?
What did you have in mind?
Just some of the happenings in fitness, right? Like a lot of things we have to observe and see take place, but it's not in a well-established, controlled setting.
Maybe. I think typically what someone intends by pseudoscience is like, it's one thing if something doesn't claim to be, It would only be the issue if it claims to be but is not.
Okay, got it. Got it.
So, if we say, for example, the experiential element of fitness is just maybe irreducible, or it's, that consciousness aspect that goes to each person. I don't know that that's making a claim to science, although it could be, but it's more things that would try to make a claim to science that would in fact fail the test.
Got it.
So, okay. So anything to add there before we go on to questions?
No, I think we've clearly stated that we just want to, get at that bigger question of can it be studied, and maybe, I'm not sure if that's where we'll lead it, but in order to study it, we got to probably define it first,
Right.
Yeah, and which we've tried.
Right. Well, I think, yeah. So, I mean, that's kind of where I want to go next. So just like we've done in all previous episodes with truth or knowledge, like we could do multiple episodes on what is fitness and what is science, but I want to give us something to like hold on to a little bit, just to have some reference points. So science, if we just want to have some basic definition of science, the dictionary definition is the observation, identification, description, and experimental investigation of phenomena, natural phenomena. So key features that, if you guys are listening, you can just latch onto. It's an investigation into natural things going on. A really crucial part that distinguishes science from other things is science is an attempt to explain and predict. And I'm sorry if you're hearing loud thunder in the background. It is storming where we are.
No. Attempt to explain and predict. That's key.
Yeah, that's key. So science attempts to say, why is this particular thing happening? Like the apple falling from the tree or the moon orbiting the earth. But not just explain, but also try to predict in the future what will happen.
Mm.
And then in terms of its method, it uses hypotheses and experiments to get closer to the truth via scientific theories. Now, it's a common misconception that I dealt with all the time when I used to teach philosophy classes. People, colloquially in English, people think theory means like good guess, when really it means interwoven structure of experimental data that has explanatory and predictive power, like theory of evolution, or universal gravitation.
The general thing that people will say will be like, yeah, that's a theory. That's how they'll answer it back. It's like, yeah. But I think we've defined theory differently, Yeah,
agreed. So that's some basics on science. And then fitness, like James said, for those of you who haven't maybe heard him yet, we have 2 full episodes 1 and 2 of this podcast on what is fitness. So if you're interested in the full details of that, you can check that out. But today, I just want to distinguish between the practice of fitness, like hiking, squatting weight, completing a mixed modal workout, and the study of fitness, like what's the best way to develop muscular strength? Or how long can a human being sustain true glycolytic activity? Or how does one properly fuel the oxidative system? Most of what we're going to talk about today is the study of fitness, and can that be a science? But we will also end up talking about the practice of fitness, probably some today, but especially in the next episode where we talk about how do science and fitness relate, how much overlap is there and how much not.
Yeah.
All right. And then that's pretty much it as far as a preface. So I guess the first question we can get to is the study of fitness even capable of becoming a proper science? What do you think?
I have, the thing that I immediately think about is the challenge of what is powerful inside of science in reducing things down to make them controllable across a bunch of individuals, and how so I've moved past the point that we somehow have a definition of fitness. So we get to that, fitness being physical expression to live a large life. Okay, so I just reduced even that to a definition of it. But if that is the case, I think it's really tough to create the correct practice of science application to fitness being so broad. That's where I'll start, as being a really challenging one. Like, we have to be super generalized. I wrote down generalizations without considering experience and expression ability. Like, how do you create these studies to extrapolate and create explanations when it's such a broad and deep category, Robbie, of a person's physical experience and their expression ability. Just think about like, it blows my mind, the continuum of how a 16-year-old biologically, psychologically, sociologically reacts and thinks as a simple experiment, compared to Donald Trump. Like, just think of the man, right? And man, do you think we're going to like put fitness somehow inside of there that could be studied as just a generalization? That's the first place I go. So maybe you can help me remedy something around just that first point. But that's where I initially go with this issue of studying it.
Yeah, and I can see that as a problem. So you're missing a huge part of the experiential aspect of the practice of fitness, as I take it. That's what you're saying.
I'm thinking more along the lines of, well, yeah, no, that's included in it. I'm just thinking along the lines of, like, if the ultimate goal of studying fitness through scientific practice is to get to some predictions and explanations and observable phenomena that we could like latch onto and say something about, we're not just thinking about this that just goes off in the periphery, right? We're talking about humans actually in this practice, right? Physical beings, right? And that's where I think it becomes really challenging. It's the generalizations that we'd like to say, right? Like, if you do leg curls, your legs will get stronger. You know what I'm saying? But it's like, not for everyone. And if you see what I'm saying, like, well, what do you mean by that? Well, someone who's been doing them for 30 years, do you see what I'm saying? So it's this putting science inside of this super broad category that I'm hoping you can help me with, maybe with an analogy of another area that's how they come to an understanding of even making those generalizations valid. You know, and if it's the case everywhere, but I think it's not. Like, and I'll give you a point of reference for it. There's some physical phenomena or study in physics that is generalized across all areas. To me, it just makes sense. That's a scientific phenomenon or law, I guess, that fell into place. And in biology, like, mitochondria or the cell study, it's like, it's not that much different between all humans. So we can create some generalizations in what that mitochondria does and function, I'm saying. But when we put science alone and fitness alone, and then we put humans in the mix, right, and how broad they are and deep, that's where I just get stumped in creating generalizations, right? Like, you'll get stronger if you lift weights. And you see how that's just like, oh, that just comes off our tongue, right? It's like, but no, you won't. Not everyone does. Why? Because of that, what I called experience and expression ability. So the human factor makes this complex for me to understand.
So yeah, the expression bit definitely makes sense. Do you feel like that could also be something that's discovered within science? The fact that,
yes,
if you do leg curls, past a certain point, you will not get stronger.
Yeah. And that's what I said, that, we need to think about the pluses and the minuses and the unknowns of reducing it down to, like, the hamstring being fatigued in a leg curl. Right. Because when you reduce that down and down and down and down and down, you end up with rat studies, so, and then you just end up with, like, thought studies, and that becomes science. You know what I'm saying? So, you put 35, 54 to 59-year-old men through a leg curl study with 25 years of resistance experience. You see how you get something from that, right? But how about you take 35 people across the board of all experience and they do leg curls? See what I'm saying? You can't really get a lot from that.
Right.
So that's where I get a little stumped on the generalizations for the human experience, right? Yeah.
No, I think that's a really good point, and it brings up two things that I'm kind of thinking about that I think would be really interesting to discuss. One is, and this is a big area within philosophy of science, called reductionism, scientific reductionism. So to give people an idea of what this means, sometimes philosophers wonder, is chemistry reducible to physics, and is biology reducible to chemistry? And basically, can it all be reduced down to mass hurtling through the void, or are there some other things going on there? So that's one piece that I think would be interesting for us to touch on. And then the second piece is, related to your point, is it that science doesn't currently have the means to assess all these different things we would want to assess inside these experiments, about nervous system activation and thermoregulation and cognitive state and all that stuff? Or is it just that in principle, the very thing we call science, in trying to reduce and generalize things, is missing this huge component of fitness? So
yeah, you've cracked open a little in my brain there of the former comment on, is it possible there's not enough in place to act as a base support to study that? That's where you cracked open my brain, given a little bit of light to that one. So I appreciate it. And I will waste too much time here today trying to dig further into that one, but I think there's something in that. Just current technology, current thought process. Yeah, just a way of thinking about how to do that so that you can use what's available to push it across, all boundaries with availability of resources. So yeah, I think you got me there. You got something there. It's possible. It's possible, but maybe today it's very challenging.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
That's good too, because that's something else we'll discuss that we discussed a little bit. I forget which episode, but it was basically like, before Newton and Darwin, people were doing physics experiments and biology experiments or things related to it, but were they proper sciences? It's an interesting question. We need to get to the point that we had devices that were able to measure things in a certain way, and we had access to things. So one thing you might be able to say, kind of like what you're saying now about fitness, is maybe the study of fitness has the ability to be a proper science. It's just that technologically, where we are in 2020 and the way we think about it, we're just not there yet.
Yeah, like the Fitzometer that I used to joke about, right? That little machine everyone would put on, and they would do a group fitness workout at 6 p.m. some Wednesday night, and they'd wake up the next morning and the device would be like, "That's aging you, buddy. That's aging you." You know what I'm saying? But to my point, like, maybe we don't have those devices available. If what I agree upon, Robbie, would be like, this measurement of great consistent mental acuity, a device that could tell you if you're going to be capable of physical function for all tasks that are necessary for today. And, if there's a device that measures, like, if you're going to be able to live a large life. Just think about that. Like, although that may sound crazy, what you've opened my eyes open to is maybe it's just at this time, because we have a newer definition of it. Maybe not a newer definition, but a newer, I guess we'll call it an acceptance, Robbie, that we don't need to do fitness to, like, survive the lion anymore. There will be this adjustment period until we get to devices that measure, constant mental acuity, physical function capability, and being able to live a large, long, effective life. But you never know, there might get to a point where there'll be enough data, which I probably think it is available. And I think it's available. I think the story's been done millions and millions of times over. But yeah, so it's possible. That's possible.
Okay.
That's possible. Yeah. The other area of issue that I have with it for a study of it is, we discussed this before, and I think this is what may let us into this discussion. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the intentions of the study and the intentions of the studies, even if the classification of the pieces of fitness are not for long-term vitality.
Right.
Yeah, so you could dig deep in terms of, connecting things like we've seen that when people ate broccoli for 20 years, it resulted in this. And then you're like, oh, that's fitness. So therefore, um, but I think most of the intentions inside study up to 2020 has largely been about, decreasing fatness, anti-disease, or performance, right? And therefore, it's very challenging to propose, to have the intentions and the hypothesis as the start of the study, right? In science of fitness, to be like, well, why are you looking at this? You can just imagine stepping up to the review board, right? We want to look at this for 30 to 45 years, maybe 2 billion in total cost. You know what I'm saying? It's just like, and you've lost them at point two, right? Why? Because it takes that amount of time to like see the whole thing play out. Because what are we going after? The beacon of what our definition is of vitality, right? Not performance or what makes you less fat. It's vitality. And there's just not a lot in there in the biological or physical models of science. So I'm not sure if you have any thoughts on where that may stump us for the study of, is the intentions are awry.
No, I think that's a great point. I think going back to what we were saying about why is philosophy useful, this is exactly why, because you can generate any sort of data if you have any sort of assumptions. Do you know what I mean? Like
True.
you can go in and set up an experiment and say, oh, well, I generated all this data. Look at all this stuff on, hey, post-workout nutrition. Like we discussed the other day. What's the best post-workout supplement? But then you have to, this is where philosophy comes in and steps back and says, well, but why? Why are we talking about that in the first place? Why are we designing experiments? And this is where having relevant concepts like vitality or figuring out what are the concepts you are trying to investigate. If your central concepts are performance and aesthetics, well, that's going to yield certain results. But if you step back and say, hey, why are those the only two things that we are investigating, that will yield a whole different series of explorations that are not contained within the other ones.
Yeah. Yeah. So philosophy will help us, or that's, it just goes to show the power of that. You're going to ask more questions to figure out what those intentions are. So that makes it positive. It doesn't help us, answer our question today, but it's a positive thing. Another issue that you could probably help me remedy is the current time, right? The study of science, not the study of fitness, and saying science and fitness goes together. You have to look at it in historical reference and also future, possibilities of what that's going to look like we'd mentioned previously with what we don't know. But from what we do know, let's just take, how science, I guess I would say, yeah, you can maybe correct me wrong, but science in the 60s, science in the 70s, science in the 80s, science in the 90s, science 2000, science 2010 up to 2020. Today, because of the information age, the concepts of expertise versus experience makes things hard to go towards truth and reality. So I think it's a timely issue also. It's a timely issue. 2020, with so much information, Robbie, so much information, we're actually not even really sure. And this is not just for a study of science and fitness. I know this to be true, for example, in nutritional sciences. There's people that will have 40 years of work on actually spending every working moment disregarding so much fraudulent, shitty studies in nutritional science from like shit journals and sham journals and like bullshit, stuff that's really well put together in order to like scrape and get to real shit that's effective. You know what I'm saying? So this is also a reality inside of fitness today that I just think the expertise versus experience and what is real, because of the information shared, is really hard to like even wrap your fingers around that. What's your thoughts on that and how it applies to the study of fitness and science and fitness?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good point. I mean, this happens not just in the study of fitness, but it happens in all sorts of other sciences
Yes.
where there's these dominant paradigms that um, suck up all the air in the room, and people can't even think outside of the relevant concepts in those paradigms, and that kind of delays progress. And then someone comes along and says, "Well, why were we even thinking that way?"
Yeah. Well, I
And
think it was your previous point on pseudoscience. I guess that's where that comes in, because there's claims made within pseudoscience ideas inside of fitness today. That is, I would
right,
say, rampant, more so than any like truth seeking.
right, and I think, I mean,
Today.
I'd say another element there that we'll probably talk about at some point too. There's a sociological component about just the actual literal, and they ask this in philosophy of science too, the literal business of running a study.
Hmm.
You just want to get the funding for such a study, and
Yes.
who is funding?
Yes.
If you're trying to sell shoes and supplements, well, you're going to fund certain
Yeah.
studies. So that it's not. We think of science as objective and rational, and I think in its ideal, it really tries to be. But in physics, you're not trying to sell some shoes. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
But in
Well,
fitness,
sometimes people were trying to sell those bouncy things on the back of the Airs, right? The Air Maxes, whatever they're called.
right. But I think that is a relevant thing within the study of fitness, is that a lot of the money that goes into setting up these studies in the first place is to drive some sort of particular sale. Certainly not always, and certainly not everywhere, but that is a relevant component.
Um, we've discussed, and maybe if you need to, do it again, but another issue that comes up is the reductionism. I'm not sure if we need to repeat that, so I'll just skip it. But I did have that down as being a big time issue, is reducing down where we lose the human experience that's inside of fitness. And I'll parlay that now with another issue that I see, and maybe you can help with that. Getting to possible study of fitness is that, are there other examples, Robbie, where there's a phenomena that needs to be studied that's really complex and therefore it requires different models that are not like the traditional scientific model? Because I'm thinking, when you discussed about compare in your notes, compare and contrast with sciences, because inside of fitness there is loads and metabolism and adaptation and human behavior. Like it's complex phenomenon, right? So in a complex phenomenon, and you're trying to study that, you get into Taleb's concepts of fragility and systems that are not organized, and how to look at chaotic systems, right, and how to study those. So I see fitness as a very, very, this is my lens, okay, my lens, but a very, very complex system. So if that is the case, and as we've defined fitness as being super complex, it just seems there's so many sciences involved, Robbie. And what do you do to that? What do you do in that case? Do you succumb to just saying, okay, it's a complex model, therefore we use complex systems theory, right, on top of that? But then I have a problem with that, because in anti-fragile models of that belief in fitness, it comes up short as well. So I'm not sure if you have any thoughts on the complexity inside of the study of it, because of just so much shit in there.
Yeah, I mean, I had two thoughts. So one thought would be, maybe we could suss out, and I think this is an interesting question, like you said there were so many sciences involved in studying fitness. Maybe we could suss out what sort of things can be determined by what different sciences within fitness. So for example, um, anatomy and physiology really good at like muscular contractions, and biochemistry at the different, metabolic pathways. But then maybe we need, psychology and sociology to, help us understand the different
Mm-hmm.
components of, how someone reacts to a workout. So that was thought one.
Yeah.
Thought two is, with quantum mechanics right now, anyone who says they have any idea what's actually going on at the fundamental level of quantum mechanics, as my physics professors and philosophy of science professors would always say, like, has no idea what they're saying. Like, we're very good at predicting things, but we don't have the conceptual framework right now to actually describe that. And maybe what's going on right now is, just like with other things that eventually became a science, like physics or biology, we are struggling to find the right conceptual framework to understand this very complex thing. And maybe we'll get there, and we're just not there yet. So that
Yeah.
could be the thing that's going on.
Yeah, I think it is a complex thing, and I think it's seemingly outside of my mind and maybe your mind. It doesn't seem worthwhile. That's another thing.
Like
Let's be honest.
the study of it, you think?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, possibly it's like, which I'm sure some people would probably say that for different kinds of studies in other sciences, right? It's like, this is useless. Like, how is this useless to meaning and faith? I mean, and morality and origin, the big four questions. What's this got to do with all this, right? And vocation and play and relations. So that could be a part of it. As soon as you said we just don't know, we just don't have a good framework of like the reason why to study it, that could be the case. I agree with you. And then it made me think that maybe just no one cares, right? Maybe no one cares about it, because that does have some part to play, in it. Maybe you and I are the only ones asking the questions, just as an example, right? You're the only two people out of 8 billion asking that question. Um, I'm sure there's others that have it deep down in their psyche,
But as you say that, I mean, it does make me think of something that I think is interesting in relation to the concept of fitness we've been discussing. Maybe, and correct me if I'm wrong, this could be related to what you were just saying, is, so the asking, is the study of fitness a science, maybe as a product of a particular way of looking at fitness. And, when you've talked about in past episodes and in other contexts, the practice of fitness, it being a lifelong thing, and, moving against each other in grade school and things like that, and not measuring like elbow angle and things like that. I think getting back to that point, I think it is an interesting question. If that is our conception of fitness and what it ought to be, kind of this thing that leads to mental acuity and physical expression and autonomy, what role does the scientific study of it play? Does it play a role? Is there more of an intuitive, experiential thing that doesn't need to have, these different measurements? I don't know. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, no, I get no, nothing to say, but I understand what you're saying there. I can understand how we could get that questioning of importance just based upon how we frame what fitness is. So if we go back to that definition, then it's maybe it's okay that it's hard to like slap all this reduced pieces on top of it, but I do think so. Yeah, I have nothing to add to that, but I do think what made me think about was something you said earlier. Based on our definition of fitness, and is it just like in where I've been studying more so recently, past couple of years, my involvement with the Brand X method came back to my roots on my initial study of motor control and growth and development, and my deepest curiosity inside of that back in my university days. I didn't know that I was so curious around just human development, but now that I have kids and I'm involved in fitness, I look at that. My whole point being is that it's well accepted inside of that model of like, not this, but reducing it to this question: what is the best fitness program for kids? You have to look at the biopsychosocial model as a base support of it. So it's complementary and holistic and whole. And that's what you start with as a frame of reference. So then you can start asking questions. And every time you ask a question or create a theory or try to improve something, you say, is it based upon our BPS concept? You know what I'm saying? So let's just take it as a broader approach now. And maybe what you just mentioned there is that with your example of like kids just moving around and doing it for this, just figuring out how well they do it and if they can adapt and get better over time. Maybe we have to take all those things into consideration, right? So, and maybe we just have to come to the fact that it is a complex area. And it doesn't mean you negate science in that just because it's complex. Maybe you just like have a framework of biopsychosocial as being that, you know what I'm saying? And there's probably more to that, but like there's been other models in the study of pain that have led to some real great contributions into understanding pain better, right? And they moved beyond the BPS model into what some people call a 5E model, but it's more cognitive based and neuroscience based and behavioral based, right? It's deep. It's deep to understand pain, right? But they were able to study it because they created this frame of reference, right, as to how they're defining pain. So I'm talking a lot here, but I think if we define fitness better, I think it'll get us back to being able to have a base support to study fitness as a science.
Yeah, I think so too. And a few things come to mind there. One is, so in philosophy of science, people talk about, the negatives of scientific reductionism and scientism, kind of saying that everything is reducible to, quantitative stuff. And maybe, as you've said in previous episodes, studying kids' knee angles or hip angles or different things like that in certain contexts kind of ends up being really reductionist. But I do think there's an extent to which, like you said, if we do define fitness correctly, there are facts of the matter about what increases mental acuity.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
There just are facts of the matter about, as humans, yes, we have different brains and things like that, but there are facts of the matter about which physical activity tends to lead towards better neurotransmitter function. That's something that can be studied by neurology. Now, you may need to go to other aspects to explore the phenomenology of like, what's that actual experience like? That,
Mm-hmm.
That's a different thing. But science, I think, can contribute to questions like, how do we improve our physical capacities? How do we improve our mental acuity? There is a role for science.
Yes. Yeah. And we're just agreeing, I guess we're both agreeing that it would just be, it's complex. It's a lot to it. If you're going to put all those things in there, right? Because we only mentioned a couple, right? Just mental acuity and capacity, but there's like, step 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah. And yeah, I like that because it was timely for me. I just listened to these two neuroscientists who were musicians speak the other day. And so it was tying in this topic perfectly of like the arts and the music having this like, it's hard to touch it, but some music can make some people cry. Right. And so or like even Jackson Pollock, images can make some people just like spend an hour looking at it. You know what I'm saying? And I look at my children's drawing, I'm like, oh, that's somewhat similar. But my whole point is that sometimes inside the art, it's very tough to connect some scientific application. But these guys have done a super job of like tying in how, for example, jazz musicians, when they hear different music, different parts of their brain light up differently than other people who are not jazz musicians hear that same music. You see that? So like it actually can be studied, right? There is some like science to it. I just think it takes it's in depth. So that's what I got from my whole meandering around the complexity of it. Just accept it. It's going to be complex and you're going to have to wrap some stuff around it, but not forgetting what our definition is, right? Because it could go off into Neverland, I think, if we lose sight of what the definition is.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, maybe that's, again, going back to this thing philosophy does about asking what is the nature of the thing, maybe the nature of the study of fitness is such that unlike other things like chemistry, it just involves all these other different sciences. I mean, chemistry can involve other sciences. It can involve biochemistry, and you can have, physics and things like that. But fitness just involves so many different aspects. It's not a purely cultural phenomena.
Yeah.
It's not a purely biological phenomena. It's got aspects of both.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have an idea or analogy of another area that you could add to the list you just proposed there, or just where there's other complex phenomena has had success in it becoming a science or a study of?
Well, I
That's
mean,
where I got kind of frustrated of looking at science in that lens many years back led me to fragility models or systems, um, just understanding systems. My mentor, who passed many years ago, Bernie Nowakowski, embedded that in my brain on like you know trying to understand systems or systematic thinking, which led me to just like trying to see systems everywhere, of course, which of course biases me in my lens, but that kind of led me to it didn't lead me to much because I got kind of frustrated. Understanding is just complex, you know.
the main one that's coming to mind right now, and this, none of these things are a perfect analogies would be physics. So, I mean, optics, thermodynamics, electromagnetism,
Yeah.
mechanics, astronomy, these all used to be kind of disparate disciplines. And now we've progressively gotten to a point where, yeah, they have their own people studying them and their own conclusions and things like that. But, there are these four main forces, at least currently that we know of, that are
Mm-hmm.
governing
Mm-hmm.
all these different things.
Yeah,
So maybe
that's a great example. That's
maybe
what I
there's
thought about
some.
that. I didn't even recognize it, but thank you for your recognition of that.
Oh, no problem. And I mean, part of the hard part with, you know, part of where the physics analogy breaks down, although I think it can be useful, is there's no like practice of physics, the way there's a practice of fitness.
Yeah,
And essentially, the human component is kind of, there's discussions about it, but it's not as central as it is to fitness. So we have to get into things like psychology and
yeah,
sociology,
yeah,
things of that
yeah,
nature.
yeah. I know, and that becomes robust,
Yeah.
you know, because we haven't even talked about the or just adding inside of that, just take one component of psychology, right? Um, of intrinsic behaviors, just that alone. That alone is real complex, and if that's added inside of it, then that has to be imparted in the study, right? So if you're going to study it and you want control, oh man, it just becomes mixed modal. That's what it becomes, Robbie. It's multimodal.
Mixed modal science.
Mixed modal science. That's what it's going to turn into. um, is how do you put all, well, this is interesting, right? How do you put all those things together, and how do they all work together, right? And maybe I'll come up against some of those issues I had with just the black box thinking with regards to fitness. Is that the human's experience and their capability of expression that largely dictates what they should be doing, right? What they should be doing, not what they can do, is what they should be doing. And you don't fix that just by like giving someone a band, another person saying, do this many reps. It's got to be personalized.
Right.
Yeah.
But within that, I mean, you can have, it's personalized to the person, but the personalization is based on general things that have been discovered about what tends to, you know,
Yes.
yield certain results. And then it's, made specific to that person within that.
Yeah. 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 What you make me think about there is just the starting points to what has probably been done in study of some certain elements already is, having some controls around the age and their experience, right? So like 16 to 17-year-old females in a cohort studying leg strength, I mean, you're probably going to get some things from that,
Yeah.
right? Not fitness though, but it's probably got to do with who's going to get injured, peak height and weight velocity changes and what it led to in proprioception at the knee, et cetera. So um, yeah.
So one question that might help tie things together a bit is, so we said earlier that one of the goals of science is to explain and predict things. In the definition you've been proposing of fitness, if there were to be a study of true fitness, not just performance or aesthetics,
Mm-hmm.
what sort of things should the study of fitness try to explain? What are we seeking to understand better? Like, what phenomena are we trying to get at in the world and understand and explain better?
Yeah, the first things that come to mind is adaptation. You know, how those humans adapt to the experience. Yeah, that's what I would look at. Also, holding on to the theoretical beacon, right? Like, does it lead to good mental acuity, physical function, and
Right.
capabilities for any task, and a really happy 85-year-old,
Right.
um, that's the two things I think about is what would be we'd look inside of that. But I think there'd be some deeper pieces that Sapolsky has, clearly done a really good job of looked at already inside of that. But I think if you put fitness on top of that with different intentions, it would be parallel stuff you would look at, which is like, how are you adapting to this stuff? Because inside of that is like behaviors, awareness of the tasks, intentions. It's just so many things inside of it that how someone adapts would be the ultimate measurement of adjustment, you know?
Right.
So that's what I think. Yeah.
Okay. So things like, you know, I mean, multiple different things there, but how muscle grows or neurotransmitters function or
Yeah. Yeah. Like the thing I proposed, remember on the post-workout nutrition task the other day is I talked about like, what is the dose, right? And if you understand what the dose is and so if you understand what the dose is, then you got to look back at what the expression was, right? And so in like to your point, what would be measured in that is, humans do something and then we just see what happens afterwards, because that's an indication of how well they adapted to what they just did. Does that make sense? So
yeah.
it would just be the measurement of that ongoing, and and then as well, I believe there's two stark different models in that based upon how resilient someone is, that it can go to a net negative long term adaptation, right? I call it compensatory adaptation, which again needs to be studied and clearly thought out, because it could look really good. Someone could be leaner and more, fit, right? But it depends on what you're measuring,
Right.
right? Whereas someone over there is actually improving an adaptation, but it takes 16 years to see the constant little adaptations that led to positive. Does that
Right.
make sense?
Yes. Make a lot
So
of sense.
that's where I believe, you know, again, then adaptation would have to be defined really clearly. And then the issues which I talked about as well is time and space screws everything up. The time it would take to get all that looked at would be another challenging thing. But yeah, so the adjustment that a person makes, I guess, is the key thing, right? The adjustment. How well did you adjust to that?
Okay.
Mm, yeah.
And I think, I mean, that I would, if you're okay with it, that'd be awesome to dig deeper on, because I think, and this is a problem within philosophy of science as well, like, scientific experiments are set up to measure things, but
Mm-hmm.
what quantities are we measuring? Like we talked about with, things like A1C or velocity or aesthetics or performance, like, are these the relevant things that we want to measure? And even if they are the relevant things, are they just reductionist? Are we missing a big piece of the
Yeah.
the puzzle?
Yeah, well, I think based upon, I'll just use, the idea that I talk about for, giving a program design that's just slightly in front of someone. If we were actually to create science around that, I think that we could be getting somewhere, because it's also answering like how well you did adjust to that task, or that, how well you adapted. If you don't know what I mean, remember I talk about, I have my hands on the screen here, so I'll try to describe it better. When someone does something as a physical expression, ultimately in that physical expression, we want all systems challenged slightly, right? So essentially what we'd be looking at, Robbie, would be the difference in scientific study and measurement, the difference in what is a slight overreach of that session and what is too much in that session. So you actually can, and this would be, probably in your wheelhouse currently, which I know from FDN studies, and homeostasis and adaptation is, you actually can measure, as an example, salivary cortisol post-exercise every 20 minutes for like 2 hours to see how well those systems come back to zero. Do you see that? So that could be an indication. That's a measurement, right? That's a measurement. You just did something. So do you see what I'm saying? So how do we put science inside of that for adaptation and measurement? Maybe we need to come up with some ways that clearly organize like what you just did, right? And how well you're adapting is largely indicated by how fast you recover. You see that? And I think that can be studied, right? That can be studied. But I think we're so excited about just, smashing shit, and salvation that we forget, like, you just need something a little bit more.
Right.
And then that's what's leading to our definition of adaptation long term.
And I take it would be a mixture of subjective and objective elements. So for example,
Most definitely, you'd have RPE in there and feelings of exertion and whatnot. And then there would have to be some truth in the matter of like,
right.
I just want you to do one more rep today.
Right.
Like, don't do 3 more, do 1 more rep.
Right.
But as you can imagine, trying to like connect some positivity to that compliance without people being pulled into the void of like just madness and savagery is tough.
And I think even with that, going back to what we were saying about like, fitness is so complex. How can we even get a handle on things? Just like other sciences that had to develop over time, we could start out with these basic measurements of, is your time on the air bike just slightly better? And what's your, rate of perceived exertion?
Yeah.
And then maybe as we go on, we get better at measuring nervous system expression. And we get different things that we can't really as accurately measure now that adds to that picture. But now we just have these kind of smaller windows into.
Yes. And I think that, as we mentioned earlier, I think it just might not be the time. We may not have, like, just to make fun of it, I think we would have to set someone up with 12 machines every workout session. Like very complex and very expensive. And then over time, I believe there'll be like, your phone will connect to your heart rate, and maybe heart rate variability will go like meta heart rate variability testing, which they start seeing, different other systems that are connected to heart rate variability we never decided to look at. Do you know what I mean? Maybe heart rate variability is not going to just show us the difference between beats in a 2-minute time frame, right? Maybe there's more to it than that. Maybe there's like 5 different versions of the HRV in that 2-minute time frame that give us indications of it. You see what I'm saying, right? So yeah. Over time, I would hope that, our stuff that we give off can be measured so that we can quickly see right away. To my point, the Fitzometer, where someone finishes a workout and I'm just on the screen going like this, doot, doot, doot. Like that was overreaching. It shows me with a cane, right? Do you want to be like this? So I think that may.
It's like one of those speedometers that like shows you your.
Yes, that's what I was thinking of. Yeah. No. My Tesla does that. My 3 just screams at me and sends loud signals, and anyways, so it's capable. We're capable, and you're giving it hope, Robbie. I appreciate that.
Yeah, the analogy I'm kind of thinking of, at least in kind of the FDN health world, is, for a while fasting blood glucose was kind of the thing, and then post meal, and then A1C, and now things like glycomark and other things, but just successively better windows into what's actually going on.
Yeah, and to that point, like it was the constant philosophizing on if it's the right method that got them to that, right? It's asking questions like, those iterations of people that, take it and didn't have massive flux, right? Or people that were misdiagnosed, right? Or, then it's like, scratching our head. So let's look at something more, right? And then you get people come in who weren't those practitioners way over here, who I called them like the healers, right? Because that's really what I had in my own head. They come in, they're like, maybe you need to think about it differently, right? And then all of a sudden medicine goes, yes, maybe we should look at this blood sugar management over like a 2-month process. It's like, and then well, how do we, you see where it goes, right? How do we measure that? Well, we look at these markers, and they looked at, oh my God, inflammation's kind of important, it's, so, and then they're connecting it, now they're probably connecting it incorrectly to a lot of other things, because it seems, as another idea that's really good, but we're getting there.
Yeah. So I guess now that we have a good starting handle on like what the study of fitness would try to explain, I think that was a great discussion around adaptation. What are some, and we've talked in the past about some things you think we know in fitness, so we've talked a bit about that.
Mm-hmm.
But what are some things that we don't currently know in the study of fitness that you would like to see explained? This kind of goes back to, I'd pose kind of what were the unsolved problems in fitness? What are some things you would like to see explained that have not yet been successfully explained?
Yeah. The first one that comes to mind is a model to show what I have observed as better decision making and better and clearer thinking on compliance of fitness. I think that one would shut the case, would close everything. You could just imagine, if there was a really well studied process where it was like these group of people who participated in constant fitness slightly outside of their capabilities for 10 years, and they all made these unbelievable advancements in self-awareness and measured psychological evaluation. Just imagine that, right? So that's where I think that's the first thing that comes to mind, that that would close the case.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be a super good evidence. Now, in your mind, is it
Because and there's a deeper reason for that, as it's like it's got nothing to do with looking good naked, right? It's got
right?
It's got everything to do with the intentions around making good decisions,
Right.
and clear thinking. Yeah.
Do you think it's an issue of currently we don't have the proper means, either via neurotransmitter testing or psychological testing, to determine that, or do you think the experiments have not been done?
I'm more of a skeptic. I think the intentions are not there to study it. Yeah, more pessimistic in that view of it. That it's probably looked at in different ways, or probably hijacked information over, right? Some neurotransmitter information pulled over, but like, oh, this can do this, right? Guaranteed, you can see it in the high intensity model efforts or something, or intermittent fasting or something like that, right? But yeah, that's what I'd like. That's one area. What was your question again? See if I can come up with another one that I'd like to see studied.
It was basically, it's kind of going back to that in principle versus like in fact question. So like with regard to mental acuity and fitness, is it the fact that in principle right now we don't have the...
Oh no, I got that one. I meant the original question on what I'd like to see. What was the question I'd like?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
What are some things you'd like to see the study of fitness explain that have not yet been explained?
Yeah, another one I'd like to see explained is some of the complications in individualizing exercise energy expenditure. Because I think we're 30 years behind on dose effective exercise, right? Like, man, we still use jump rope models as far as energy exercise expenditure, and how that relates into like what. So because where that's going to get itchy is that it's going to bump up against the laws, thermogenic laws, right? And that's where you'll get really itchy in the nutritional sciences, because I really do think, from my observations thus far, that we're going to have to really rethink that whole concept of those equations of energy in, energy out, based upon what actual physical expression does. And I don't think the physical expression study has been done enough, right? We've put a few young guys in a lab and said, do some weights. Oh, that's what the calories you burn, I don't know why it sounds like a Texan studying every time, but that's where we've come. And we haven't moved much further than that. Right? Why? Because we mentioned earlier, it's fairly complex. But just think about this. Like, think about up to 2005. How many people did thruster and pull-up workouts all out for 5 minutes? Up to 2005, right? Like almost zero, right? So from 2005 to now, how many people in the periphery have done that, right? Fucking millions, right? So, and what's our base support of what we got to work on, like what you actually did there as a dose response, as well as what's the effect biochemically and metabolic wise. This is what we do. It's probably something like running. That's our answer. That's our answer, honestly. What's still inside of the energy equation for weight loss studies, right? They're like, oh, we studied this weight loss and people did weight training for 3 times a week and this was their energy expenditure and this is the food they took in and that's why they got leaner. It's like, man, what an archaic model. So that's where I think we could make some steps. I think it would start to really flip our concept of the dose response of exercise and metabolic effects.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't understand. Like, just to give you an example, like literally the other day we had a question from a client about why did my husband burn 300 more calories than I did with the same workout? And people just have no sense of like, well, the Fitbit says the calories, but like, what are the models based on? Again, this is where the philosophy comes in. Like, you just based on this running model of college age kids or jump rope model or what have you, you're going to get certain data out. And like, what things specifically were you measuring?
Yeah.
You might miss a whole slew of things that weren't contained within those specific measurements.
Yeah. Female, 35 pounds less, a couple of reps done less, like, because they don't know that's the mathematical equation, right? Height and weight, age, gender, put into it, beep. That's what's going to end up happening. And they're like, where did they get that? Well, it's METs based upon a calorimetry calculation from 1986. Like people don't, they're not getting that, right? It's like 1986. Has it moved much since then? Not a lot, man. Not a lot, right? And there'll be a number of people who will argue against my point there, who are probably in a lab looking at some more specific things on metabolic outputs and effects. But the individualization approach based upon what's practiced in fitness is like really archaic. So I'd like to see some study done there, or some inching into it. I think not to pat myself on the back, but I think I'm asking those tougher questions today that may move that a little bit further forward, right? On my concepts of intention, modality, and person dictating the dose, right? Because what we have in place now for science is the modality dictates the dose. That's it, not the intentions, right? Because people are like, oh, that's hard to study based upon what people's beliefs going into it. It's like, you got to talk about that, right? That has to be inside of it. To my point, like if people really want to lose weight, they will go in with the intention of doing it for the action of losing weight. And if you don't think that's not connected to intentions that result in changes in motor unit composition, activation, and like, et cetera, and thermogenic response, you're sorely missing the boat. So you can get 2 people on a treadmill doing the exact same fucking thing as you're measuring, but 2 of them have different beliefs. Oof. Right? That's a rough one, but hey. But we know it to be the case, right? We see it in muscle activation. I was so fortunate to be a part of that work where, I would ask, we would do arousal, right, based upon this electricity charge into someone's bicep and studying like how much activation they have. And I remember Paul White, one of my friends and colleagues, and someone was in a study, he was scared to death of this, right? And I knew that was going to lead to a change in what I was going to see in the maximum voluntary recruitment. And so prior to it, one of the tests, I had to kind of like just try to calm him down, and then full well knowingly that he was just going to get it and just have to react to it. And then down the road, I do it again with him, and I'm just like pumping him up, right? I'm just like basically everything besides kicking him in the nards, basically, right? Slapping them on the traps and like, you can do this, Whitey, and sure as shit, even though the tension was the same on the score, the activation was different. Think about that. That blew my fucking mind, right? That blew my mind. So, what stuff you're going to have in there for arousal and intentions do have a part to play in that. Sorry, I was lengthy on that, but shout out to Whitey and his bicep and electrical charges.
No, I agree with that point. And I think, this also gets to a really interesting question that we'll probably get to next time as well, about the relationship between science and fitness, where, like I was saying before, there is no such thing as the practice of physics or the practice of chemistry. Like, there's just the science of it. They're theoretical and experimental versions. But with fitness, we might say kind of like with functional medicine or something like that, there's a research scientific laboratory component that can tell us certain things. But going back to what you're saying, there's a whole clinician, coach, client thing that tells us a whole different, maybe the same, but related set of things that you can't get necessarily as well from the laboratory setting around intention and the person and things like that. So it's not like physics where you can just, oh, I can set up this experiment, do this thing like that. There's a tremendous amount that goes into the study of fitness that comes from the coach-client relationship that can't just be done in a lab.
Yes, yes, that's the, yeah, that's again, that's the deeper complexities inside of it. But I think what we've learned today is that we just got to accept that it is complex, and we may have to use some good questioning to figure out how to create some balancing support on that complexity, right, to study it. So
Yeah.
I think we did get somewhere with that, which I appreciate.
Yeah, I think that was a pretty good discussion. You have
Yeah.
any final thoughts?
No, I feel good about that. It feels like a good meal. I learned some things, which is always why I'm here. So I appreciate that. You did crack open a little space in my brain for some of those thoughts, and you asked some good questions on some things that we can look forward to studying. It has inspired me. I went through a really deep, scientific investigation, not entirely of every living moment, but from the mid 90s till, the 2005, 6, 7. And I kind of moved away from it. And over the past couple of years, I've been digging more back into this topic on science and fitness. So I appreciate the topic because it's inspired me to keep fighting the fight on asking some good questions and not giving into just getting exhausted by seeing that there may not be many answers right in front of me. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I always learn something. And I appreciate your philosophical thinking on these subjects. I think that's kind of what inspired this in the first place, is just, again, going back to the post-workout nutrition, or like, we have all this science on stuff, but like, what question is it asking? Like, you're one of the few people that I've engaged with who's asking that. Like, we're asking about what the best post-workout thing is to have, but like, why are we asking that question in the first place for health and vitality? Like, just those deeper philosophical questions about like, why is science investigating this in the first place, and what things should we be investigating? And that's really where philosophy comes in and helps, with the study of fitness, I think. So
Yeah, great. So hopefully we've inspired some people who are listening in to do that too. Ask some of those questions now, and maybe propose to us what a third or fourth or fifth thing that you just asked me at the end that we could get into for that,
yeah.
which would be really helpful. So it'll be a part two. Do you think we need to dig a little bit more in terms of the back and forth between these two, science and fitness?
Yeah, but I'm open to whatever path we want to pursue. I think it would be interesting to explore just a bit more, like, what sort of things could the study of fitness tell us, and what could it not, and what can the coach-client relationship tell us that the study of fitness cannot.
I agree. I agree. You've already stated that. I forgot already. So yeah, there's a lot more to that. So that is that way till the next time.
Perfect. All right. Thanks so much,
Bobby.
James.